A shout out this week to everyone hunkered down as the nation continues to work its way through the COVID-19 outbreak. This episode was recorded in mid-March when the CDC decided to shut down nearly all group gatherings. By the time this episode goes live, much will have changed, so I'll try to make my comments here a bit more evergreen. We're now in the days before the Christian holiday of Easter and the Jewish holiday of Passover. Both events are extremely important on the faith calendar and come at a time when people may be turning a little bit more deeply to their faith. Our faith shapes our opinions, and there's nothing wrong with that. As we consider this, I think you'll enjoy today's guest, Father Leo. He's fun, entertaining, and above all, thought-provoking. After you listen, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Send me an email to tim@shapingopinion.com. If it's easier for you, get in touch on Twitter or Instagram @shapingopinion. And if you want, we can give you a shout-out. As always, thank you for being a listener of the Shaping Opinion podcast. You're the reason we do this. This is Shaping Opinion, a production of O'Brien Communications. Father Leo, what gets you out of bed in the morning?
Well, generally my alarm clock, to be honest with you. And secondly, for the most part, it would be my schedule of travel, because I do a tremendous amount of it for the work that I do as a missionary priest, so to speak. So, I mean, also, if I don't work, I don't eat. I mean, that's the Bible. And the other reason is because, like, as much as I love sleeping, I also like living. And I think you got to wake up sometimes if you want to live.
I'm Tim O'Brien. In this episode of the Shaping Opinion podcast, we're joined by Father Leo Patalinghug, also known as Father Leo. He's many things. He's a podcast host. He's a renowned chef. He's a sought-after public speaker. But above all, he's a Catholic priest. The premise of our podcast is simple. We talk about people, events, and things that have shaped the way we think. In this episode, we'll talk about the unconventional approach Father Leo takes to everything in his life and why he does it. By now you've heard the term personal branding. Usually when you hear the term, it's about how to turn yourself into a business, or at least create a personal identity that makes you more marketable in the job market. Today we're going to talk with Father Leo, a Catholic priest who has deployed nearly every tool in the personal branding toolbox, but not for himself. He's on a mission. As Dan Aykroyd said in the movie classic The Blues Brothers, he's on a mission from God. So where do we start? Father Leo is involved in many things. He's a Catholic priest, he's a renowned chef, an author, a podcast host, a TV host, a theologian, a relationship expert, an international speaker, an entrepreneur, and he's even a black belt martial arts instructor. But don't let all that diversity fool you. There is a common thread. No matter what he does, Father Leo's message is one that he says attempts to unify people.
So as far as my background is concerned, I am a Catholic priest, and I've been a priest for, at least at this interview time frame, over 20 years. I started off doing parish work like every other priest, but I also had some unique skill sets or some background that people tapped into because they felt that there could be a connection to faith, and whether it be my breakdancing or the martial arts, or the fact that I had a passion in cooking where I would actually go to families' homes and cook with them. And so at that stage, it really became a thing where somebody heard about it, they helped to grow the movement online, and somebody saw it, led me to the Food Network. And from there, when I was in the competition with Bobby Flay, it literally exploded because everybody wanted to know about this priest who can cook. And it helped me to create what I call now a theology of food. Because right now, people are very concerned about food. They have a great attention to it, but they look at it very esoterically. It's kind of like just looking at it from the outside. I want people to understand food in a more spiritual, theological, a deeper way.
Well, let's go back to that experience you had with Bobby Flay. I guess before we even get to that, what prompted you to become a foodie?
Well, I studied in Italy. I was a seminarian student at the North American College, and I lived there for a total of 6 years. And in that time, I fell in love with the Italian cuisine, which was shocking because I actually didn't like Italian food prior to my going to Italy. That's the strange part. So I just didn't like it. But what I learned was that Italian food was way better than we understand it here in America. And so I just started to fall in love with just the whole food culture in Italy, to the point where I even took some cooking courses just because I thought it would be fun on my breaks and on my day off. And of course, I did a lot of cooking at the seminary itself because that's just kind of what we did growing up. I've always grown up cooking with my family. And so it became a thing. That's how the food developed. But really, it became a very spiritual thing on a retreat where the retreat director asked us to have our meals in silence. And in so doing, asked us to reflect on a deeper level, affecting all of our senses, every bite that we ate. And so it just became a real exercise of a spiritual mindfulness of how food connects us to generations and to people we don't even know. I mean, like the farmer that grew that food, to the people who sold it, to the hands that cooked it, and the people who are serving it. So we just know that food has that power in it, and it really kind of affected everything that I did. I started to look at my faith through the lens of food.
Well, that's the beginning. And obviously through practice, you became not only a good cook, but a chef.
Well, yeah, I mean, the term chef is pretty ubiquitous, and it can mean many things. But chef kind of implies that you have the skills to lead, to execute appropriately a meal, that there is a certain discipline and a certain level and standard. And if you're in charge of something, or even if you are primarily making your income through food, that kind of qualifies you as a chef. And it doesn't require you to be trained or to have a degree, but you certainly have to have those disciplines of someone who is trained and someone who does have a certificate. And so technically I am a chef because the majority of my life is based around food, and I do lead food services. So that's kind of who I am right now. And it's weird because in the kitchen, sometimes people don't know what to call me. Is it Father Leo? Is it Chef? And I say, just if you're going to ask me a question, just ask respectfully and we'll get it done. It doesn't matter.
Well, tell us about your experience with Bobby Flay, because that seemed to have been the flashpoint for you.
Well, to be honest, I didn't know that it was going to be this competition, because the precursor to his now hit show, Throwdown with Bobby Flay, was previously another hit show called Throwdown with Bobby Flay. And basically the premise was the Food Network wanted to do a little episode with a chef who was famous for something. And they just were doing like a little spot, like a little, let's talk about your culinary background and let's learn about your special dish. And then it would turn into a surprise cooking competition, because Chef Bobby Flay would show up out of the blue and challenge you to the dish that you are making. And so it was a lot of fun, but I'll be very honest with you, it was incredibly serious and a little bit stressful, because you're not suspecting this guy to show up at an event you are doing to talk about family meals. And I'm cooking fajitas, which just happened to be his specialty. So the lead up to it was a surprise. But then, to be honest with you, I kind of don't care about people's titles. I just care about people. And Bobby Flay is an incredibly genuine person. What you see on TV is how he is in real life. So I know he's not fake. And while I know that this was a very serious competition, I firmly believe that competition should bring the best out in people, not the worst in people. And so I just decided to enter into this competition with both feet on the ground and thinking forward. And I just kind of cooked. And he's always going to be a much better chef than I am. He's going to be leagues ahead of me as a cook. But it just so happened that my recipe beat him. And I'm incredibly happy about that.
What did he say after you won?
Well, he was obviously very complimentary. And, before he got whisked away with his entourage, he just was very gracious. I had seen him again a few months later at an event, and he saw me in the crowd, and he called me up and we chatted a little bit. And he actually said, I'm getting tired of people asking me about you. I thought, well, I'll take it. And he actually said something to that effect on an interview where he just simply said, Father Leo is a great cook and he knows how to compete and he had a lot of fun. And I don't know. I felt quite validated because I don't really care if people know me as a great chef. I want them to know that I, first of all, know how to cook, but I have a culinary perspective, which I think our world needs to pay more attention to.
That was the flashpoint. So when did you decide that this was going to be your platform for everything else that you would do?
That's just literally years of discernment. And discernment is sifting through everything a person is experiencing to get to the nugget or to the truth of who you are. And, I never studied theology and took courses after college for 6 years to become a priest in order to have a cooking show. But, when the world is saying to you, I am hungry for this message, then you kind of have to pay attention to it. You see, I never want to give up my priesthood because despite all of the bad news, there's an amazing good news in the priesthood. And one of the great news that we provide is that we're literally giving people the daily bread that we're praying for in that prayer, Our Father. Give us this day our daily bread. And so I'm kind of giving that. Along with that, a side of pasta and a cut of meat and some amazing vegetables and some wine, but that's not to replace the sacred nature of my work and the sacred nature of, Holy Communion is what we would call it, the Eucharist. But I started to realize that before Jesus gave us this spiritual gift, he also just before that just gave us food and drink, water, wine, bread. He just fed people. And that kind of helped me to see through a really long process of discernment, which not only is just not me personally thinking about it, but hearing from other people and talking to some trusted spiritual counsel and advisors and always being respectful to the authorities above me, because I'm not a priest for myself. I'm a priest for the Catholic Church. I just started to realize that, my gosh, people really love this message and that they're looking for it, they're hungering. And maybe God is asking me to do something different, which is actually the most difficult thing for me to do because I didn't want to be different. I mean, I know I always am different, but I didn't want to stand out. And so it was a real challenge at one point, but I made the decision and it has literally become a worldwide movement because of my discernment.
Can you describe that moment when it presented itself to you that you had to accept this role for yourself?
Well, I mean, there are several kind of light bulb moments, but one of them was when I experienced some challenges in a situation in my current ministry. There was just something very challenging, and I kept asking myself, this does not make me happy. What makes me happy, and what makes other people happy? It was really coming against a wall. It was almost as if I was doing everything right, but nothing was moving forward. And I had to keep asking myself, why? What is happening? What's going wrong? And in honesty, it was not that I was doing anything wrong. It was that maybe God was closing a door in order to create another path. There is those scriptural, spiritual sentiments, like if God closes a door, he opens up a window, like one of those moments where I had to actually ask myself, is it because I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Even though I was doing everything literally textbook to a T, but it just wasn't working out. My interior disposition wasn't happy. There was just kind of this anxiety that was created in me. And I had to ask myself, what do I long for? And it just kept coming that, maybe I'm supposed to be doing this, spreading the word by spreading a table.
There is no better way to find common ground with people, especially people that you may not understand, than through food, is there?
Yeah, so that's actually the premise of one of my other outlets, my podcast called, it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek name, but it's called Shoot the Shiitake with Father Leo. And my podcast is all about me just talking with people, sometimes around a meal or just sometimes as if we were at a bar and just kind of having a very honest conversation. They can talk in whatever salty language they want. They can just be very real people. And so that's kind of my whole premise, is that food has a way of bringing people together and even, touching hearts and minds just by going through the stomach.
Well, there's something about, I just wanted to provide a quick summary for my listeners because they may not have heard of all the things you do. I did include some of this in my introduction, but you have Plating Grace, and that's a movement that you've led. And it's this mission to build relationships, strengthen families, communities, all around the power of food. And then you have this foundation called the Table Foundation, where in 2015 you founded the Table Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization that has its mission to support the culinary community, along with assisting those returning to the community from the prison system. So that's almost a separate ministry. So you have your hand involved in a lot of other things. So you've done a lot of different things. What are your priorities in terms of time management so that you can focus on the things that are most important to you and still make sure that you do all of these other things and make a difference?
Well, time management is always going to be an issue for, I think, everybody. You just simply have to do it. And you look at your priorities. I don't film every day. I film during times of the year. And so when I'm filming, that's the priority. When I'm doing my own radio podcast stuff, that's the priority. What really falls aside on the wayside really is my writing, because, I've authored 4 books. And I'm scheduled to write more. That's when I don't have the time to do it, because the one thing that I'm not going to do is I'm not going to give up my time for resting and sleeping. I'm not going to burn the candle at both ends. I just know that that's not helping anyone, because my work requires me as a speaker, as a multimedia host, as an author, and just as a content creator, but above all, as a Catholic priest. I didn't get ordained to not be busy. So I think part of my personality thrives on the energy that it takes to do multitasking. But I also totally know how to be lazy. I am so good at being totally chill when I need to be totally chill.
You mentioned filming and you mentioned the video work, but you also produce YouTube videos. Is that part of your filming schedule, or do you do that more frequently?
No, that is unfortunately one of those things that is not systematic yet, but we are going to be moving towards a more kind of organized and strategic release of video content. Currently, it's incredibly random. It's literally when I can. So oftentimes the background is changing because I'm in a different hotel room and I'm in a different space. And so I literally just have to record when I can. And I really am bad at technology. And so I look forward to, getting better at it with a team of people who can help create more quality content that can actually generate a little bit of financial support, because the majority of our finances and my work is all about appearances, me literally going across the globe, showing up, speaking, and cooking. And so that's kind of where we get our bread and butter to support all of the other work that I'm doing, including the nonprofit, which you mentioned supports the culinary industry and returning citizens. So there's a lot going on.
So much. And you said that you travel. And I know as part of your international travel, you do something else, and it helps people get back to their faith. And I watched some videos and listened to some episodes of your podcast. And I know that in one case, and you've done this multiple times, but in one that I listened to, you went back to the Holy Land with a group. So you take people on tours, and you don't take them on a traditional tour where you just visit the holy sites. You do that, but you also integrate cooking and you integrate food into that process, and you make that a spiritual experience. How do you do that?
For sure. The pilgrimages that I lead are designed to help people experience the culture as closely to the culture as possible. It's very easy to go to any place and turn it into just a touristical experience. But I just find that to be honestly a little boring and a little fake. So what I try to do is get people in touch with the reality of the culture. And the best way to do that is to meet people where they're at. I know that's bad English, but where are these people? Well, they're at their dinner tables, they're at their markets, they're at their local grocers. And so I want to make sure that we don't only visit those spiritual places that nourish the soul, but we kind of go to the regular, mundane, typical experience of people, the markets and their stores and their shops and even some farms and their factories, so that they can really be nourished in their soul with something what I call companionship, like literally just walking with people in their daily life, so that you can get a sense of who these people really are. And the way you do that is at the dinner table. So on some of our tours, we will have dinner with locals. And it's just an amazing experience because, again, you can show people the tourist side of any country, and it's incredibly impressive. But then you can also meet people and develop a bond with them at dinner, and that just becomes edifying.
We are plating grace with a Holy Land-inspired meal, falafels. I lead a lot of trips, especially to the Holy Land in Jordan. I've got one coming up this June, so please join me. All you have to do is find me at fatherleofeeds.com, because there we experience amazing food, including these falafels, which, by the way, a lot of the Arabic Christians would eat this instead of meatballs, especially on Fridays during Lent, and that's what we're gonna do. There's a little stand that I used to go to quite a bit when I was there for a while, and I gotta tell you, this guy knew how to make some falafels, so I'm gonna try to replicate his recipes. Falafels are basically a chickpea fritter, and so we're gonna add some beautiful aromas, just Middle Eastern inspired dishes.
Do you have any one memory from all those pilgrimages that stands out for you as that sort of aha moment, that moment that you just can picture like it was yesterday because it achieved everything that you're trying to do in that one story?
Yeah, I think part of it was when I went to visit Bethlehem with some very local and very authoritative guides. Usually tour companies, they'll just give you like a regular guide who kind of just repeats the same thing over and over and over again. And so to them, they become experts in what they know. But I went privately with these local guides, and I was testing them to see what they know, what they don't know, because I don't want to inflict their lack of knowledge on my pilgrimage groups, to be honest with you. And in Bethlehem, I was talking about just being in a holy place. I just brought up the fact that the word Bethlehem in Aramaic means house of bread. And my guide, who also spoke Arabic, said, yes, but Father, did you know that in Arabic, Bethlehem means house of meat? It's the place where meat is sold. And I just remember standing in front of Bethlehem's cathedral where Jesus was born, the site over which Jesus was born. And it just struck me. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this makes perfect sense. Bread, the Eucharist, and the meat, the Eucharist. For me, we believe that that piece of blessed bread is the quote unquote body and blood of Christ. So the flesh and blood of Jesus encapsulated in this bread. We call it carne, incarnation, the meat. And so there was a great theological moment that just really strongly affirmed what I had always believed about the Eucharist. However, I just didn't have context until I met a local. And that local gave me a great insight as to why Jesus will say, take this bread, it is my flesh, it is my blood. And it just really strengthened what I believe as a theological truth. And that just happened in a very profound way, just by having a very, very honest conversation with someone about this.
And it's a lesson that you've shared, obviously, with other people since.
For sure, because if I've received something, I believe that it is a gift, and therefore I need to share that with others. And so many people are just kind of getting closer, not only to the food that they eat, but to the people they serve. And you were to ask, well, why did Jesus become bread? And the simple answer is so that he can dwell within us, so that he can actually still be a part of our life in the most intimate way. One of the most intimate things you can do besides having a sexual relationship with someone is feeding them. And that's kind of the whole purpose to this theology of food, is to learn how we can become more intimate in an appropriate way with one another just by taking the time and sharing a meal with them.
Father, I'd like to go back to something you mentioned earlier, and it's your podcast. And you mentioned the Shoot the Shiitake podcast, which is it's a funny name. I have the trailer from your podcast, and in that trailer, you talk about the various guests and approach that you will take to the podcast. And I've listened to several of your episodes of the podcast, and it is just not like anything that anyone would expect from a Catholic priest. And it's not even necessarily like someone would expect if they thought of you as the food priest. It's definitely a departure from other things that you've done.
Plating Grace is proud to introduce to you our latest venture, the podcast Shoot the Shiitake with Father Leo. And if it sounds edgy, it's because it is. It's a time when I simply have conversations with very unlikely guests, people who are very different from my experiences, my political opinions, my spiritual formation, and just different from my Catholic faith. I'll be talking to a transgender, an ex-convict, an ex-priest, homeless people, a gay couple, you name it. If it's controversial, I want to have a conversation. Because at Shoot the Shiitake, I firmly believe that good conversation leads to conversion.
Why did you decide to take a break from your own pattern with that podcast?
Well, actually, I didn't take a break from it. I'm just actually expanding what I do, because a lot of people might know me just for the half hour that they watch me on TV, or if they've heard my radio work, or if they saw me give a presentation or a cooking demonstration. But they don't know what else I do. I actually have deep conversations with people around the dinner table. And what I did in the podcast was simply record the kind of conversations that I normally have around a meal. They're generally deep, sometimes funny, usually edgy, a little bit practical, but it's just me getting to know people of different backgrounds. So it's actually not a departure from my traditional work. It's actually expanding it. It's showing people a deeper aspect of what I do as a priest, called to build bridges and to make connections with people. So I'm learning from them. Hopefully they can learn from me. And it just makes this world a heaven of a better place when we're just willing to just sit down and talk with each other like normal people.
What guest from your podcast stands out for you as one of the more powerful guests, or maybe the guest that maybe generated the most feedback from your listeners?
Oh, well, gosh, I've gotten a lot. I mean, to be honest with you, The Exorcist has gotten a lot of responses. When I interviewed a transgender before and after the surgery, that certainly got a lot of responses. But to be honest, there's one that just stuck out for me because I wasn't planning on interviewing him, but he was my guide on a little kayak fishing trip that I took with 3 other priests. And he was just a regular dude. He was like some 20-something-year-old dude who just thought that we were cool. He didn't know we were priests. He thought we were military men. And then when we told him we weren't military, he thought we were gay. And I'm like, no, dude, we're not gay. We're priests, just going on a little vacation. He goes, well, that's pretty cool. So he just started talking and he asked, what we did, what I do. And then, of course, like my whole life is strange. He learned that I was also a chef and we had caught some really amazing fish. And so I said, I'm going to cook this up tonight for dinner. I mean, if you want to come by, come on over. So he and the other tour guide came to dinner. They had never had dinner with a priest like this, and I just thought, this conversation is really awesome. Would you mind if I recorded this for my podcast? And he actually gave one of the most profound definitions of humility that I had ever heard. And knowing that he gave it to me, and he was incredibly honest because he just kept talking about smoking pot, so we were talking about pot for a little bit, the whole 420 culture and what it's like as a dude and where does he get his own high. So it was a completely unplanned, unscripted, very natural, as all of my shows are. But this was a little bit more of a surprise because even though he was just some 20-something-year-old dude, he taught me, a priest of 20 years, a very beautiful definition of humility. And I'm not going to tell you what it is. I want people to listen to the show.
Do you remember what episode it is?
I can't remember it.
Okay.
It's one of the early ones, but it's about pot smoking fisherman dude. I think that's what I called it.
I will put that in my show notes. So if anyone listening wants to go to shapingopinion.com, this episode, and you will find a link to that episode on our show notes. I guarantee that. So yes, I look forward to that. Well, there was one other area that I did want to ask you about because, again, like everything else that you do, there's always a different twist on it. And I follow you on social media, and I see your Twitter feed. And again, you have a very plain-spoken way to say things, sometimes funny, sometimes very provocative sometimes, and sometimes very common sense, but always true to your ministry. How do you describe your approach to social media?
That's so funny because all of my social media platforms are very different. Facebook, I'm very priestly, and I'm priestly out through all, but it's generally news oriented. With Twitter, it's kind of more comical and funny and just goofy and food. That's Instagram. Twitter, it's actually a place where people are trying to gain space to effect emotion and judgment so that your decisions will be affected. And Twitter has become really not a place for lengthy conversations, but really for just sending out bite-sizable thoughts. And what I've discovered, especially in light of all of the manipulation done by tech companies to voice opinions one way or the other, that we've really lost a lot of critical thinking skills. And so for me, Twitter has been a place where I can be critical in my thinking, just to be, to provide critique, but not just to diminish people, but on a constructive level, even if sometimes I have to tear down an existing building because it's got a faulty foundation. And so I had no idea that it would become very political for me. But prior to the priesthood, I studied politics and journalism. And so it was a craft that I thought I was going to make my life's goal and career. But obviously I'm doing something very different now. But I've always had a passion for politics and journalism, which you might never know because I always have some sort of stupid typo on my Twitter feed. I hate it. But besides that, people know what I'm talking about. I'll just blame it as English being my second language, But the what I'm seeing on Twitter is, again, just a lot of information, and people aren't discerning what does it mean for me and how is it going to affect my life and my decision. And so I just simply respond in kind. I try to make people think critically about what is being said and being generally accepted as truth. And it's very frustrating to me because people assume they know what my political position is, and they would be incredibly surprised to know what my party affiliation is.
I saw you post that one day. And it is a surprise because you tend to speak what a lot of people might say is common sense. But in the very polarized political world, you can't be. People will assign you a party if they think that's where you're coming from, and you surprise people with that.
And I'm having fun with it to the point where actually, in one of my upcoming podcasts, I'm going to interview someone who really wanted to come after me about something. And so I said, he tweeted me and direct messaged me, and he just basically wanted to make me apologize to him. I say, I'm not going to do that, but I'm willing to have a conversation with you. And if from a normal conversation, I feel like I've done something to offend you, I'll be happy to apologize, but I'm not doing it on social media. You got to realize if you're a public person and I'm a public person and you're speaking something publicly, all holds bar, man. It's like the Twitter rules take over. Don't be such a wimp, just because I said something critical of you. Don't think that you're diminished in any way. Be a man and either prove your position, and if you want to have a conversation with me. And at one point, he didn't want to have a conversation with me. But then just after a few direct messages, I said, look, this is just kind of who I am. If you want to talk, let's talk like a normal person. So the Twitter is really a place to engage people on a quick level. I don't do it in any systematic way. Oftentimes, if you see multiple tweets from me, it's because I'm just taking a break from work or I'm at an airport. That's when I'm most vicious because I have nothing to do but to wait for this stupid plane to take off.
And that's your productive time then?
On Twitter, at least. At one point, the airplane rides was a time for me to write a lot of my books. But these days, I'm using the rides just to kind of center myself, to pray a little bit more, to sleep. But I know that I've got to kick back into high gear and start writing more books.
After looking at everything that you do you put any thought into the demographics that you're actually targeting through all of this, or do you do what you think makes sense and let it unfold the way it does?
So yes and no. I have to be strategic with what I do and what I say. I know the majority of my demographic and audience are women, sometimes an older crowd, but I also have a large group of, dads and men who follow me, and also teenagers. So again, the different outlets of social media dictate my approach because I know who I'm trying to reach out to. However, my style of communicating is literally aimed for people between the ages of 14 to 18 years old. So I literally talk to that audience all the time. And why? Because in that age group, you're going to reach the majority of the other demographics. If I can affect a 14 to 18-year-old's mindset in a positive way, you better believe parents and grandparents are going to be excited. And certainly younger brother and sister are going to look up to those brothers and sisters who are older and say, well, if they're doing it, then maybe it's not as horrible, because they don't want to admit it, but they're still kind of cool because they're older than I am. And so I also realized that 14 and 18 is an age where, please forgive me if I sound overly spiritual, that's an age when the devil is really attacking their minds, because they're old enough and physically mature enough to be adults, but they're experientially still children. And so it's a very perplexing and confusing time for them. And so I really want to make sure that my words can make sense to a 14 to 18-year-old, because their bodies are growing at an incredibly powerful rate that their minds need that formation. And if a priest is boring and not talking to them because he's talking like an old man, then I'm failing in my job, because that age group is incredibly powerful for all demographics. That is the age group that businesses are trying to affect. So everything that you see, from entertainment to fashion to sports, it's that age group. They've got to be able to accept it and understand it. And so the church needs to pay attention as well.
Father Leo, where can people find you?
So you can generally find me at an airport. Okay, so that's number one. But if you want to find me, literally all you've got to do is Google Father Leo. And if you Google Father Leo, you're going to be brought to the main website, which is platinggrace.com. My social media is Father Leo Feeds, just because, Plating Grace, people won't know what that is, but they'll know Father Leo, and I feed people. The TV show is on EWTN, and it's called Savoring Our Faith. And on my platinggrace.com website, you can find access to Shoot the Shiitake, to all of the books, all of the merchandise, all of the pre-recorded talks, and just be part of the community, including the nonprofit group.
And the Shoot the Shiitake podcast is on all major channels.
That's right. You can just go to platinggrace.com/listen, or just click on to Shoot the Shiitake, and it's on all basically the podcast platforms.
And we will put links to everything on our own show notes for this episode. Father Leo, I'd just like to thank you for joining us today and wish you the best for this holy season.
Thanks very much. God bless you.
To learn more about Father Leo and everything we talked about today, please see our show notes at shapingopinion.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please help others find it. Leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd love to hear from you. On Twitter, just tweet to us at Shaping Opinion, or you can get in touch with us through our website, shapingopinion.com. We have a Facebook page, and we're on Instagram at Shaping Opinion. Shaping Opinion is a production of O'Brien Communications. This is where we talk about people, events, and things that have shaped the way we think. Until next time, I'm Tim O'Brien.